The first time Marshal Gideon Vale saw the outlaw called Ash Rourke, the man was riding into Mercy Bluff with a bleeding child in his arms and Gideon's face under the brim of his hat. Dust hung in the morning light. The little girl on the saddle gave one thin cry and went limp against the outlaw's chest. "Doctor," the outlaw said, before anything else. For one long second, nobody moved. "Before we go any farther, settle in wherever you're listening tonight, and tell us in the comments where you're hearing this story from. There is something mighty comforting about knowing a fire like this can reach across so much dark and still find company." Then the street woke all at once. A ranch hand reached for a rope. Deputy Tom Bexley grabbed for his revolver. Somebody on the boardwalk whispered that the devil had finally come to town. Gideon stepped off the curb and raised his hand. Nobody fires. Ash Rourke swung down from the saddle as carefully as if he were carrying glass instead of a half-conscious girl soaked through at the waist. Gideon got close enough to take her weight, and that was when the blow landed. Same gray eyes, same jaw, same scar at the left brow, though Gideon had earned his from a colt's wild hoof at 10 years old and had never imagined another man wearing its twin. Dr. Ruth Fallon came running from her surgery, widow's black apron flapping, hands red from some earlier patient. "Inside," she snapped. "If you men want to stare, do it after she lives." Gideon carried the girl in. Ruth cut the dress, found the bullet wound, and told him to press down hard. The child's blood ran hot through his fingers. Behind him, Tom had gotten a rope around the outlaw's wrists. Ash did not resist. He only kept looking toward the closed surgery door. "Her name is Lily Fawn," he said. "Creed Halvern's riders hit her pa's wagon south of Dry Willow. Burned it. Shot him. She hid under the axle till I found her." He spoke without hurry, but pain roughened the edges of every word. A bullet had torn across his shoulder and left his shirt stuck wet to the skin. Tom jerked the rope tighter. "And we should believe an outlaw rode into a town full of wanted posters out of the goodness of his heart." Ash looked at him once. "Believe what you like. Just keep your doctor on the child." That answer should have made Gideon hate him. Instead, it landed somewhere uncomfortable and human. Then Gideon saw the thing around the outlaw's neck. Half a silver watch case, worn smooth on a rawhide cord. Without thinking, Gideon touched the matching half he had carried inside his vest since infancy. The only thing Sheriff Boone had ever told him came from his dead mother. Across the street, old Clara Wren, who kept rooms above the mercantile and had seen half the county born, went white as flour. By noon the rumors had outpaced the sun. The outlaw had come to kill the marshal. The marshal and the outlaw were bastard brothers. The child would die. Creed Halvern had started shooting witnesses on the South Road. Mercy Bluff had never been a quiet town, but that day the noise had a frightened edge to it, like horses smelling lightning before the clouds showed. Gideon sat in his office with Ash tied to a chair across from him and the two halves of the silver case set on the desk between them. Neither man spoke for a while. Ash finally said, "I got mine from the woman who raised me. She said it belonged to the life I'd lost before I was old enough to remember it." Before Gideon could answer, Tom burst through the door. "Marshal," Wagoner brought in Lily Fawn's pa. "Still breathing. Barely. Says Halvern's foreman was hunting some ledger hidden at the Old Vale Ranch. Says Halvern would burn the whole county before letting anybody read it." At the name Vale, Clara made a broken sound from the hallway. She stepped inside, shut the door behind her, and looked from Gideon to Ash as if 30 years had come due in a single morning. "I told them one of you was dead," she whispered. "God help me. I told them one of you was dead." Ruth crossed over from the surgery after stitching Lily. She stood by the window, tired and sharp-eyed, while Clara sat down and wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee she never drank. "Your father was Rowan Vale," Clara said. "Best horseman in this territory and stubborn enough to match the land. Your mother was Eleanor. She gave birth to twin sons the dawn Halvern burned the north barn. Rowan had refused to sell him the spring on the lower pasture. Halvern needed that water for his cattle route. Rowan said no. So Halvern sent Ezra Clegg with a forged debt note and men carrying torches." Gideon felt the room narrowing. He had passed the ruins of the old Vale place his whole life without ever knowing he was looking at his own beginning. Clara went on. "I was the midwife. Rowan ran outside when the barn caught. There was shooting. Eleanor heard it from the bed. Clegg heard both babies crying and said Halvern only needed one heir alive long enough to snarl the land in court. The other, he called an inconvenience. I told him one child had been stillborn. I hid that baby in a flower chest. The other I handed over because there were guns in the room and no time for courage to think. Ash did not move. Which one was me? The baby I hid. Clara swallowed. After Clegg rode off with the other boy, I wrapped you in your mother's shawl and fled the house. At the river crossing, I found Mateo and Ines Rourke, freighters heading west. They had buried a son that winter. I put you in her arms and told her if any man came asking, she must swear you were hers. Ash shut his eyes. And Gideon? Ruth asked. Clara's gaze shifted to him. Sheriff Boone intercepted Clegg at Red Fork after one of Halvern's hands got drunk enough to brag. Boone took the baby and buried the truth so deep even I couldn't reach it. Said if Halvern learned where either boy lived, both would die. Gideon thought of Boone teaching him how to oil a revolver, how to sit straight in a lie-riddled town, how to speak softly to frightened horses and grieving widows. The old man had carried this secret to the grave. Tom said, even if any of this is true, he's still an outlaw. Ash opened his eyes. There was no self-pity in them, only an old anger worn down to usefulness. Mateo taught me to mend harness and red sign. Halvern's cattle boss hanged him for stock that boss had stolen himself. After that I stopped waiting for the law to come walking over the hill. You robbed stages, Tom shot back. 3, Ash said, all carrying Halvern payroll. Never robbed a homestead. Never shot an unarmed man. Posters don't bother with the parts that sound less convenient. Ruth set a spent bullet on the desk. I cut this out of Lily Fawn. Army issue. Halvern buys surplus by the crate. Then she turned to Clara. The ledger. Clara drew an old key from her pocket. Rowan kept a lockbox beneath the training shed floor. He wrote everything down. Sales, threats, names. If he knew Halvern meant murder, it'll be there. The key lay on the desk between the two halves of the watch case and the blood-dark bullet. Gideon understood the easy road at once. Keep the outlaw in jail. Guard the town. Let the old Ashes keep their secrets. Keep his badge bright and his conscience spotted. Instead, he stepped behind Ash, cut the rope from his wrists, and said, you run, I hunt you. Ash rubbed his hands once. Fair enough. Tom stared like he'd just watched Gideon hand his gun to a wolf. Then Ash touched the silver case and said quietly, a name is what strangers call you. Blood is what answers when trouble knocks. That line stayed in the room like a struck bell. If you were in Gideon's place, would you have trusted him? Or would you have locked the door and prayed the truth could wait till morning? Tell me in the comments. Some choices split a life clean in two, and a person rarely knows which half will cost more. They left Mercy Bluff by the wash behind the church before the sun tipped west. Gideon rode first, Ash beside him, Ruth with saddlebags and a rifle slung across her back, Tom following because either duty or mulehead pride would not let him stay behind. The country south of town opened wide and dry under a white sky. Cedar smell thickened in the gullies. Heat sat on the land like a hand on the back of the neck. Ash tracked without seeming to try. At a stony fork with no signpost, he lifted one finger. 2 riders waited here not long ago. One mare dragging a hind shoe. Both turned east for the ridge. Watching the road, Tom squinted at the dirt. You can tell all that from tracks? Ash shrugged. Dirt tells the truth more often than men do. They left the road and cut through scrub breaks until the old Vale ranch showed itself in pieces. Chimney standing alone, fence swallowed in grass, windmill listing like a drunk too tired to fall. Something in Gideon's chest tightened at the sight. He had no memories of the place, yet his body knew before his mind did. The training shed still leaned behind the ruins. Ash dismounted first. The rifle shot came from the ridge before his boots touched dirt. Tom's hat spun away. A second shot smashed splinters from the shed post beside Gideon's head. 3 riders broke over the rise, then 2 more. Halvern's men. Down, Gideon shouted. Everything went fast after that. He dropped behind the trough and fired once. A rider pitched sideways. Ash rolled under a horse's neck, came up on one knee, and shot another man's mount out from under him. Ruth's rifle cracked from the dirt. One of the flankers folded into the grass. Tom cursed and fired wild, then steadied on the next shot and clipped a man through the arm. Powder smoke bit the throat. Horses screamed. Dust turned the air thick. Backside, Ash shouted. Gideon trusted the warning before he had time to think about it. He spun and caught the 2 men circling behind the shed. One went down under Gideon's shot. The other made 3 more steps before Ruth dropped him clean. Then came a silence, so sudden it felt like the world had forgotten what it was doing. More will come, Ash said, breathing hard. Then move, Gideon answered. 3 rotten planks lifted near the old breaking rail. Beneath them sat a rusted lockbox. Clara's key worked only after Gideon smashed the hinge with his pistol butt. Inside lay a ledger wrapped in oilcloth, a sealed deed, several letters, and a sheriff's star blackened by smoke. Gideon opened the top letter. It was Rowan Vale's hand. If anything happens to me, Creed Halvern has done it. The next pages named forged debts, bribed officials, poisoned wells, false brands filed on neighboring calves, and payments to Ezra Clegg for torching barns until frightened families sold cheap. Ruth opened the ledger and found column after column of amounts and names. Not one crime. A whole machine. Ash picked up the burned sheriff's star and turned it over. Scratched on the back were 4 words. For the second son. Sheriff Boone had meant to come back. Hoofbeats sounded below the rise. This time they were slow, confident, and many. Creed Halvern rode into the yard with 6 men behind him and the look of a man who had never yet reached for anything the world had managed to keep. He was broad, gray at the temples, dressed too fine for honest ranch work, with pale dry eyes that never once seemed troubled by what they had seen. His gaze moved from Gideon to Ash and settled there. For the first time that day, surprise touched him. "Well," he said, "I see Eleanor's grave finally found a sense of humor." Gideon stepped into the shed doorway. Ash came beside him, dust-coated and bleeding, but standing straight. "You should have left that spring alone," Gideon said. Halvern smiled. "You should have left the dead buried. Drop the papers, and I'll leave one of you alive enough to remember I was generous." Ash gave a short laugh with no joy in it. Generous men don't hang fathers and burn babies out of their beds. Halvern's smile barely shifted. "Come back under my hand, boy, and I can still make you useful. Bring me the ledger, and I'll say your record was padded by jealous men. You can ride out by morning with money in your pocket and no one chasing you." Gideon heard the true danger in that offer. Not the silver. The invitation to survive by bending again. Ash looked at Halvern for a long beat. Then he said, "The first good thing anybody ever did for me was lie and say I was dead. I don't aim to spend the rest of my life proving that cruel man right." Halvern's expression hardened. He lifted 2 fingers. Gunfire shattered the yard. The fight close to arm's length. Gideon emptied his revolver and hit a man across the jaw with the barrel. Tom dragged the lockbox toward the rear wall. Ruth shoved the ledger into her saddlebags and flattened as a bullet tore the post where her head had been. Ash went over the rail and into Halvern's nearest rider with his shoulder first. Both men hit the dirt. Ash came up with blood on his mouth and a knife in his hand. Between one heartbeat and the next, Gideon understood the worst of it. Halvern was not shooting at them. He was shooting at the saddlebags. Ruth saw it too. She slapped her mare hard. The animal bolted through the back gap in the fence and vanished into the wash with the ledger bouncing at its side. Halvern roared for pursuit. 2 riders broke after her. Ash lunged for Halvern's bridle. Halvern fired point blank. The bullet tore through Ash's coat at the ribs, but did not stop him. He dragged Halvern half from the saddle and hit the ground with him in a knot of dust, cursing, leather, and fists. "Go!" Ash shouted. "Get the book to town." Gideon should have chosen the evidence. He knew it even then. Instead, he grabbed Halvern's reins with one hand and Ash's arm with the other, hauling his brother clear while Tom's last shot sent the nearest pursuer spinning. When the smoke settled, one of Halvern's men lay dead, 2 had fled, and Halvern himself was bound in the dirt of the ranch he had tried to steal from the womb onward. But bound was not the same thing as beaten. They took shelter before dawn in an abandoned line shack above the wash because Tom could barely sit his horse, and Ash had gone gray around the mouth from blood loss. Ruth had ridden ahead toward town with the ledger. They knew only that she had gotten clear. Gideon held on to that fact with both hands. Wind hissed through the shack walls. Halvern sat tied outside to the hitch rail like a wolf forced to learn stillness. Gideon cleaned Ash's side wound by lantern light. Whiskey stung. Ash swore once, then laughed at himself for it. "Ruth would do that, Kinder," he said. "Likely," Gideon answered. For a time, there was only the scrape of cloth and the thin moan of wind. Then Ash asked, "Boone ever tell you where he got your half of the silver?" Said a woman pressed it into his hand and told him to keep me alive, even if I hated him for it someday. I thought it was one of his stories. Gideon tied the bandage and sat back. Turns out it was Mercy. Ash looked down at the watch case around his neck. Inez kept mine sewn in my blanket till I was 8. Said some things don't matter till they matter all at once. Gideon leaned against the wall opposite him. Morning was graying through the cracks, pale and cold. They had the same face, yes, but not the same life. Gideon's quiet had been taught by order. Ash's had been beaten into shape by weather, hunger, and betrayal. Did you kill men? Gideon asked. Ash met his gaze. Yes, some needed killing. 1 or 2 maybe just needed stopping, and I was too angry to know the difference. You. Gideon thought of a cellar in Red Basin, a shotgun, a boy no older than 17. Yes. Nothing more needed saying. The truth sat plain between them, unpretty and useful. Clara arrived with first light in Ruth's buggy, and Ruth was with her, dust-covered but alive. Gideon had not known how hard his heart had been braced until he felt it let go. Ledger's safe, Ruth said. Judge Ellery tried to refuse it. So I rode straight past him and woke the circuit prosecutor in Canaan Crossing. He's coming with territorial deputies before noon. Lilifun's father lived long enough to sign a statement. And Clara remembered one more thing. Clara stepped inside carrying Eleanor's old shawl, smoke-scarred and carefully mended. She looked at Ash on the bunk, at Gideon by the wall, and seemed older and lighter in the same breath. Your mother made me swear that if either of you ever had the easy chance to kill Creed Halvern, she said, I was to beg you not to take it. She said cruel men take enough from the world. Do not let them take what is soft in you too. Ash touched the edge of the shawl with 2 fingers. His face changed then, not much, but enough to show the ache under the bone. Some folks think being loved saves you from becoming hard, he said quietly. Truth is, it just gives you something worth staying soft for. Clara bowed her head. Ruth turned toward the window. Even Tom, half awake in the corner, said nothing. If this story is reaching you right where you live, a like and a subscribe help keep telling stories that still believe tenderness matters. Some people need noise to feel alive. Others need proof that gentleness can survive the same world that made the cruel men. The quiet did not last. By noon, Halvern's lawyer rode up first, waving stamped papers and shouting about unlawful detention. 3 hired guns in town coats came with him. Halvern smiled from the post where he sat tied. Told you, he said to Gideon. Men like me do not rot. We dine. Gideon stepped out into the white heat with the papers in hand. Ash stood behind him, no longer hidden, no longer bound, just there. The sight of them together rattled the lawyer worse than the rifles did. Release Mr. Halvern at once, the lawyer said. Sweat had already soaked his collar. Any material taken from his holdings is inadmissible and will be returned. Gideon looked past him to the road. 2 dust trails were coming fast from the north. I'll be glad to discuss admissibility, he said. Just as soon as the territorial prosecutor hears why your client forged debts, ordered arson, and shot a child to protect stolen water. Halvern's face changed for the first time. The prosecutor arrived impatient, sharp, and entirely unimpressed by expensive outrage. He read Lilifun's father's statement. He examined Rowan's ledger, the deed, the letters, the bullet, Clara's testimony, and Ruth's medical notes. He listened to Tom admit that Ash had every chance to run, and instead rode straight into a town that wanted him dead because a child needed a doctor. That might still have ended an argument if Halvern had not made his final mistake. He laughed in Clara's face and said, Nobody cares what old women remember once the men start talking. One of the territorial deputies, a woman with a scar through her lip and no patience left for polished monsters, stepped forward and said, They do when I tell them to. After that, things began to fall apart fast. By late afternoon, the charges had stacked high as cordwood: fraud, murder conspiracy, arson, theft, bribery, witness intimidation, attempted murder of a child. The lawyer lost his smoothness. The hired guns drifted backward from their employer. News spread ahead of the horses carrying it. Still, justice needed to be seen in daylight, so they brought Halvern into Mercy Bluff under guard. The whole town lined the street. Women he had foreclosed on watched from the porches. Men who had once taken his hand stood with their hats in their fists. Lilifan sat pale but alive in Ruth's buggy, her father beside her, bandaged and breathing. Clara held Eleanor's shawl folded in her lap, like something too sacred to set down. In front of Halvern's bank, The prosecutor read the charges aloud. Then he read the ledger pages naming every forged note and stolen tract. Territorial wax sealed the bank doors. Assets were attached. Liens were suspended. The spring on the Lower Vale pasture was restored to the surviving heirs of Rowan and Eleanor Vale. Halvern cursed until his voice broke. Then old Mabel Sloane from the feed store stepped forward and produced a letter her dead husband had hidden for 21 years, too frightened to show, while Halvern held power. In it, Ezra Clegg admitted setting fire to Rowan's barn on Halvern's order. That ended whatever hope Halvern still had of talking his way back into respectability. He made one last desperate lunge toward Clara. Ash moved first, but Gideon was closer. He caught Halvern by the arm, twisted him down into the dust, and held him there with calm, unshaking strength. Not fury, not revenge, something cleaner. Halvern spat at his boots. "You think this makes you righteous?" Gideon leaned close and said, low enough for only the nearest few to hear, "No, I think it makes you finished." That was the true end of the fight. A cruel man made ordinary at last. By sundown his accounts were frozen, his cattle line put under receivership, his private holdings seized for restitution, and the deeds to 3 ruined ranches returned to the families he had starved into selling. Mercy Bluff had never seen power come apart so publicly. People kept looking at the sealed bank doors as if they might open again and spit him back out. They did not. As for Ash Rourke, the prosecutor reviewed the stage robberies, the witness accounts, and the years Halvern had spent feeding wanted posters with the parts most useful to himself. Mercy Bluff expected either a rope or a miracle. What Ash got was harder and truer than either. Conditional clemency. Full amnesty for crimes tied directly to the Halvern case. Restitution labor for what remained. No pretending he had never done wrong. No pretending the world had given him many clean choices. Ash listened, then nodded once. "Building sounds better than running," he said. The town did not change its heart in one afternoon, but it did begin. Tom Bexley showed up at the Old Vale place 2 days later with lumber and no speech prepared. Men came to mend fence for wages delayed till spring. Women brought preserves, bedding, lamp chimneys, and one bright blue teapot Clara insisted Eleanor would have loved on sight. Gideon and Ash cleared the house site together. The work was awkward at first, then merely quiet, and then something like easy. They did not become boys again because they had never had that chance. They became men learning, late, how to stand in the same yard without measuring what had been stolen. Ruth rode out often with medicine for the camps and coffee for whoever was on the porch. One evening, after Clara had laughed herself breathless over a rooster that kept sneaking into the kitchen and Lily-Fin had fallen asleep with a biscuit in her hand, Gideon walked Ruth to the hitch rail. The board smelled of fresh pine. Crickets had begun up by the spring. Ruth touched the dust along Gideon's jaw and said, "You look less lonely when you're tired for the right reasons." He kissed her because there was no better answer, and when she kissed him back, the whole hard country inside him seemed to set down a load it had been carrying too long. Ash saw, of course. He leaned against the corral post and said, "About time," without looking up from the rope he was splicing. Weeks later, Gideon asked if he meant to stay after the restitution work was done. Ash looked out over the lower pasture where the repaired spring shimmered under late light. "I don't know how to live a small, respectable life." "Good," Gideon said. "This one won't be small." Ash considered that, then nodded toward Clara scolding the rooster, Ruth laughing at her, and Lily trying to teach a half-broken pony better manners than God gave it. Reckon respectable may be the easier half to learn. By first frost the new house had walls, the spring house had a stone lip, and the road sign read Vale Spring Ranch. People came by just to see it, as if justice needed a chimney and a fence line before anybody could fully trust it. Months later, on a cold, bright morning, Clara sat wrapped in Eleanor's mended shawl while Gideon split kindling. Ruth read on the porch steps with coffee warming her hands, and Ash taught Lily how to hear the difference between wind and cedar and hoofbeats over frozen ground. She missed it twice, caught it the third time, and grinned like the land itself had finally answered her back. Clara watched the 2 brothers cross the yard carrying firewood between them and said softly, "Some blessings arrive like thunder. The ones that last usually come home by the back gate, carrying ordinary things in both hands." Winter sun rested warm on the spring house roof while 2 matching shadows stretched side by side across the snow-dusted yard. Next time, We'll tell the story of a deaf seamstress sent to a cattle camp because her brothers were ashamed to keep feeding her, and the scarred ranch cook who learned the language of her hands before he ever heard her silence.